Kindly go through all the pages of this chapter before you start reading. Chapter 2, Kings and Kingdoms. Many new dynasties emerged after the 7th century. Map 1 shows the major ruling dynasties in different parts of the subcontinent between the 7th and 12th centuries. The emergence of new dynasties. By the 7th century, there were big landlords or warrior chiefs in different regions of the subcontinent. Existing kings often acknowledged them as their subordinates or samantas. They were expected to bring gifts for their kings or overlords, be present at their courts, and provide them with military support. As Samantas gained power and wealth, they declared themselves to be Mahasamanta, Mahamandaleshwara, the great lord of a circle or region, and so on. Sometimes they asserted their independence from their overlords. One such instance was that of the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan. Initially, they were subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnataka. In the mid 8th century, Dandidurga, a Rashtrakuta chief, overthrew his Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual called Hiranyagarbha, literally the golden womb. When his ritual was performed with the help of Brahmanas, it was thought to lead to the rebirth of the sacrificer as a Kshatriya, even if he was not one by birth. In other cases, men from enterprising families used their military skills to carve out kingdoms. For instance, the Kadamba Mayurashramam and the Gujara Pratihara Harichandra were Brahmanas who gave up their traditional professions and took to arms, successfully establishing kingdoms in Karnataka and Rajasthan respectively. Administration in the kingdoms. Many of these new kings adopted high sounding titles such as Maharaja Adiraja, Great King, Overlord of Kings, Tiribhuvana Chakravartin, Lord of the Three Worlds, and so on. However, in spite of such claims, they often shared power with their samantas as well as with association of peasants, traders, and brahmanas. In each of these states, resources were obtained from the producers, that is, peasants, cattle keepers, artisans, who were often persuaded or compelled to surrender part of what they produced. Sometimes these were claimed as rent due to a lord who asserted that he owned the land. Revenue was also collected from traders. 400 taxes. The inscriptions of the Cholas who ruled in Tamil Nadu refer to more than 400 terms for different kinds of taxes. The most frequently mentioned tax is vetti, taken not in cash but in the form of forced labor, and kadamai or land revenue. There were also taxes on thatching the house, the use of a ladder to climb palm trees, a cess on succession to family property, etc. These resources were used to finance the king's establishment as well as for the construction of temples and forts. They were also used to fight wars, which were in turn expected to lead to the acquisition of wealth in the form of plunder and access to land as well as trade routes. The functionaries for collecting revenue were generally recruited from influential families and positions were often hereditary. This was true about the army as well. In many cases, close relatives of the king held these positions. Prashastis and land grants. Prashastis contain details that may not be literally true, but they tell us how rulers wanted to depict themselves as valiant, victorious warriors, for example. These were composed by learned Brahmanas who occasionally helped in the administration. Kings often rewarded Brahmanas by grants of land. These were recorded on copper plates which were given to those who received the land. The achievements of Nagabhatta. Many rulers describe their achievements in Prashastis. You read about the Prashasti of Gupta ruler Samudragupta last year. One Prashasti, written in Sanskrit and found in Gwalior, Madhya Pradesh, describes the exploits of Nagabhatta, a Pratihara king, as follows. The kings of Andhra, Saindava, Sindh, Vidarbha, part of Maharashtra, and Kalinga, part of Orissa, fell before him even as he was a prince. He won a victory over Chakrayuda, the ruler of Kanauj. He defeated the king of Vanga, part of Bengal, Anarta, part of Gujarat, Malwa, part of Madhya Pradesh, Kirata, forest peoples, Turushka, Turks, Vatsa, Matsya, both kingdoms in North India. What was given with the land? This is a part of the Tamil section of a land grant given by the Cholas. We have demarcated the boundaries of the land by making earthen embankments as well as by planting thorny bushes. This is what the land contains: fruit bearing trees, water, land, gardens and orchards, trees, wells, open spaces, pasture lands, a village ant hills, platforms, canals, ditches, rivers, silt laden land, tanks, granaries, fish ponds, beehives, and deep lakes. He who receives the land can collect taxes from it. He can collect the taxes imposed by judicial officers as fines. The tax on betel leaves that was woven cloth as well as on vehicles. He can build large rooms with upper stories made of baked bricks. He can get large and small well dug. He can plant trees and thorny bushes. If necessary, he can get canals constructed for irrigation. He should ensure that water is not wasted and that embankments are built. Unusual for the 12th century was a long Sanskrit poem containing the history of kings who ruled over Kashmir. It was composed by an author named Kalhana. He used a variety of sources, including inscriptions, documents, eyewitnesses, accounts, and earlier histories to write his account. Unlike the writers of Prashastis, he was often critical about rulers and their policies. Warfare for wealth. You may have noticed that each of these ruling dynasties was based in a specific region. At the same time, they tried to control other areas. One particularly prized area was the city of Kanuj in the Ganga Valley. For centuries, rulers belonged to the Gujara Pratihara, Rashtrakuta, and Pala dynasties fought for control over Kanuj. Because there were three parties in this long drawn conflict, historians often describe this as tripartite struggle. Rulers are also Rulers also try to demonstrate their power and resources by building large temples. So when they attacked one another's kingdoms, they often choose to target temples which were sometimes extremely rich. One such ruler is Mahmud of Ghazni, Afghanistan. He raided the subcontinent 17 times, 1000 to 1025, with a religious motive. His targets were wealthy temples, including that of Somnath, Gujarat. Much of the wealth Mahmud carried away was used to create a splendid capital city at Ghazni. Other kings who engaged in warfare included the Chahamanas, later known as the Chauhans, who ruled over the region around Delhi and Ajmer. They attempted to expand their control to the west and the east, where they were opposed by the Chalukyas of Gujarat and the Gahadwalas of western Uttar Pradesh. The Chahamana ruler was Prithviraja III, 1168 to 1192, who defeated a Turk ruler named Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1191 but lost to him the very next year in 1192. A closer look. The Cholas, from Urayur to Tanjavur. How did the Cholas rise to power? A minor chiefly family known as the Muttarayar held power in the Kaveri Delta. They were subordinate to the Pallava kings of Kanchipuram. Vijayalaya, who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Cholas from Urayur, captured the delta from the Muttarayar in the middle of the 9th century. He built the town of Tanjavur and a temple for goddess Nishumbasudini there. The successors of Vijayalaya conquered neighboring regions and the kingdom grew in size and power. The Pandyan and the Pallava territories to the south and north were made part of this kingdom. Rajaraja I, considered the most powerful Chola ruler, became king in 985 and expanded control over most of these areas. He also reorganized the administration of the empire. Rajaraja's son Rajendra I continued his policies and even invaded the Ganga Valley, Sri Lanka, and countries of Southeast Asia, developing a navy for these expeditions. Splendid temples and bronze sculpture. The big temples of Tanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram, built by Rajaraja and Rajendra, are architectural and sculptural marvels. Chola temples often became the nuclei of settlements which grew around them. These were centers of craft production. Temples were also endowed with land by rulers as well as by others. The produce of this land went into maintaining all the specialists who worked at the temple and very often lived near it. Priests, garland makers, cooks, sweepers, musicians, dancers, etc. In other words, temples were not only places of worship, they were the centers of economic, social, and cultural life. Amongst the crafts associated with temples, the making of bronze image was the most distinctive Chola bronze images are considered among the finest in the world. While most images were of deities, sometimes images were made of devotees as well. Agriculture and irrigation. Many of the achievements of the Cholas were made possible through new developments in agriculture. Look at map 2 again. Notice that the river Kaveri branches off into several small channels before emptying into the Bay of Bengal. These channels overflow frequently, depositing fertile soil on their banks. Water from the channels also provide the necessary moisture for agriculture, particularly the cultivation of rice. Although agriculture had developed earlier in other parts of Tamil Nadu, it was only from the 5th or 6th century that this area was opened up for large scale cultivation. Forests had to be cleared in some regions, land had to be leveled in other areas. In the Delta region, embankments had to be built to prevent flooding, and canals had to be constructed to carry water to the fields. In many areas, two crops were grown in a year. In many cases, it was necessary to water crops artificially. A variety of methods were used for irrigation. In some areas, wells were dug. In other places, huge tanks were constructed to collect rainwater. Remember that the irrigation works require planning, organizing, labor, and resources, maintaining these works, and deciding on how water is to be shared. Most of the new rulers, as well as people living in villages, took an active interest in these activities. The administration of the empire. How was the administration organized? Settlements of peasants, known as Ur, became prosperous with the spread of irrigation agriculture. Groups of such villages formed larger units called Nadu. The village council and the Nadu performed several administrative functions, including dispensing justice and collecting taxes. Rich peasants exercised considerable control over the affairs of the Nadu under the supervision of central Chola government. The Chola kings gave some rich landowners titles like Muvenda Velan, a Velan or peasant serving three kings, Arayar, chief, etc., as markers of respect and entrusted them with important offices of the state at the center. Types of land. Chola inscription mentions several categories of land. Vellan Vagai, land of non-Brahmana peasant proprietors. Brahmadeya, land gifted to Brahmanas. Shalabhoga, land of the maintenance of a school. Devadana, Tirumattukani, land gifted to temples. Pallichandam, land donated to Jaina institutions. We have seen that Brahmanas often received land grants or Brahmadeya. As a result, large number of Brahmana settlements emerged in the Kaveri Valley as in other parts of South India. Each Brahmadeya was looked after by an assembly or sabha of prominent Brahmana landholders. These assemblies worked very efficiently. Their decisions were recorded in detail in inscriptions, often on the stone walls of temples. Associations of traders known as nagarams also occasionally performed administrative functions in towns. Inscriptions from Uttaramerur in Chengalput district, Tamil Nadu, provide details of the way in which the Sabha was organized. The Sabha had separate committees to look after irrigation works, gardens, temples, etc. Names of those eligible to be members of these committees were written on small tickets of palm leaf. These tickets were put into an earthenware pot from which a young boy was asked to take out the tickets one by one for each committee. Inscriptions and texts. Who could be a member of a Sabha? The Utrameru inscription lays down. All those who wish to become members of the Sabha should be owners of land from which land revenue is collected. They should have their own homes. They should be between 35 and 70 years of age. They should have knowledge of the Vedas. They should be well versed in administrative matters and honest. If anyone has been a member of a committee in any last 3 years, he cannot become a member of another committee. Anyone who has not submitted his accounts and those of his relatives cannot contest the elections. While inscriptions tell us about kings and powerful men, here is an excerpt from the Periya Puranam, a 12th century Tamil work, which informs us about the lives of ordinary men and women. On the outskirts of Adanur was a small hamlet of Pulayas, a name used for social group considered outcasts by Brahmanas and Velalas, studded with small huts under old thatches and inhabited by agrarian laborers engaged in menial occupations. In the thresholds of the huts covered with strips of leather, little chickens moved about in groups. Dark children who wore bracelets of black iron were prancing about, carrying little puppies. In the shade of the Marudu Arjuna trees, a female laborer put her baby to sleep on a sheet of leather. There were mango trees from whose branches drums were hanging, and under the coconut palms, in little hollows on the ground, tiny headed bitches lay after whelping. The red crested cocks crowed before dawn, calling the brawny pulaya plural to their day's work, and by day, under the shade of the kanji tree, spread the voice of the wavy haired pulaya women singing as they were husking paddy. Thank you.